All right. So let's quickly just jump into it, if I may, then. So I'd like to sort of approach things a little bit from who's our today's consumer? We all talk about the mechanics of what we're doing here. And we're all basically mechanics and utility people, all trying to figure out this. But who is this person we're talking to? Are they the same people that we've been sort of talking to for a long period of time? I believe that they're smarter, they're definitely faster, and they're better armed. So let's talk a little bit about this. But before we do this, pop quiz. Right. What is today's most consumed product? Somebody, give me an answer. Sorry? Coca-Cola. I said, product. It's not a product, it's a drug. In case you didn't know, it's a mobile phone. People touch and consume their mobile phones more than any other product in history. So, second question. Anybody able to answer the second question? Declan, you want to have a go at this one? 50 years ago. Newspaper? Anybody else? Cigarettes. Ah, good man. Good man. You've seen my presentation, haven't you? All right. By the way, this is my father's hand. So I want you to know he was in the, as we used to say, he's in the fag business. Something is still used. How many smokers do we have in the audience? Come on, you can admit it. So we've got about 10, 20% of the audience is cigarette smokers. Some of you might remember this campaign. This product was consumed 20 times a day. It was the most consumed product of its day. Just think of that, 20 times a day. Now, how many times a day do people touch their cigarette packs and touch their lighters? In the same way that we're touching today our mobile phones. So just think about that, because the interaction is going to be something that a lot of us are going to talk about today as we move around the world. Mary Meeker is probably one of the chief analysts. She works at Kleiner Perkins. And she's talking about the current generation of change. And she used this statement, which I think is very, very appropriate. It is materially faster and broader than we've ever seen before. So we've already gone through kind of the first generation of internet technology, and now we're into something different. And our world is changing very, very fast, and all the impact on our world. She actually gave a speech 2 or 3 days ago, and she brought out a couple of these things. So I just grabbed 2 of the slides, which I thought were kind of interesting. Formative events of the past 20 years. Think of how these things have impacted us and are going to continue to impact us for many, many more years to come. We've changed the way we think. And she's got this kind of idea about reimagining everything that we do. Reimagining the future, reimagining basic business processes, things that we used to use. Who in the audience does not have a GPS? You have a mobile phone, John. Yeah? It's very few. How many of us know how to use maps anymore? I'm sorry, I love maps. I thought they were some of the best things. There we go, I love maps. So look at things that are here. She talks about, there's a recent McKinsey article that talk about 12 disruptive technologies. I call them the dark side, because you've got mobile internet. And by the way, there's a copy of this presentation that will be available to everybody, so you don't have to take notes. But these are things which are disrupting what we do. These are things changing how we do things. We're not doing the same things anymore. And we won't be doing the same things again. So what was yesterday's consumer like? For those of you who are American, the term Camelot was well known. Here's Jackie and John F. Kennedy on their way to the inauguration. Who remembers Life magazine? Such a wonderful, rich pictorial history about images. So who's today's consumer? Anybody read the Time article? Right? And who admits to having a kid who looks like the one on the left? Anybody know the girl on the right? Katie Davis? If you can, I would suggest you Google this lady. In high school, she decided that she would do something that was different. She, at the age of 22, she's adopted, I think it's 18 Ugandan orphan children. And she's dedicated her life to this. It's a lovely story. I recommend it. But this is kind of the juxtaposition of today's millennials. Is it the girl on the left or is it the girl on the right? I've got one of each of these in my kids. So I kind of know what they're like. And it's very interesting to see how they operate. But these are the people we're going to be talking to. These are the people we have to reach. The other thing characteristic that is affecting consumers is this emergence of the walled gardens. We all thought the internet was going to be open, internet space was going to be free, and now look at this. We live in what I call the AGFA world. Apple, Google, Facebook, and Amazon. And it has a dark side to it. So there's a guy by the name of Scott Cleland, and I'm not sure if he's paid by Microsoft, but he's definitely on somebody's payroll because he hates Google with a passion. And I occasionally read his blog, and this was one of his things that says, Google's global antitrust rap sheet. It's kind of a scary thought, and with apologies to somebody from ITA in the audience, but this is interesting because it is a question of how do we approach from a regulatory point of view these companies which span way outside the control of a single regulatory environment. So it's just something to think about. So let's move on to talking about the interface a little bit, about how we talk to the consumer. Where do you want to buy today? And how do you want to buy today? Do you want to buy in the old traditional way with the widget? Or do you want to buy that beach, that lovely image? What would you rather buy? Would you buy the GDS screen on the left, with apologies to anybody here who works to the GDS? Or would you like to buy the thing on the right? What do you want to buy? Which is more expressive? Which is better for you? Which is better for the consumer? The consumer thinks of the stuff on the right. We've been trained, because we're all old geeks in here, to think of the stuff on the left. Anyone remember this guy, Carl Malden? He ran there was a campaign run by American Express called Do You Know Me? And this was the campaign. So this is the end of the explicit, lean forward, the end of things that are fixed, the end of you don't know me. Actually, we do know you. We know an awful lot about you, and there's an awful lot of other people who know about you, and we're trading information about you, and that's become a currency. Think about it. And unfortunately, we have quite a lot of social clutter which we need to get rid of. So this is kind of sad. 1 in 4 people in the United Kingdom can't remember their own phone number. I tried to count how many phone numbers I actually have possessed in my name, and I stopped at 23, and I think I have more. And then I'm a seriously sad person. Social media. Just quickly, I regard these as there's 4 failings now. Facebook is failing. Fragmentation is causing failure. There's fads and fetishes which are rising and falling at the speed of knots. And there's a sudden lack of flexibility. So this is interesting. This came out of The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, that Facebook is actually losing users. Is Facebook's 15 minutes of fame, is it over and done with now? Maybe, just maybe. It's not going to stop growing, but its importance and its relative importance in mature economies maybe declining. So what are people actually doing, these emerging consumers? They're mobile. They are mobile. They're really social. That is, they're interacting, they're communicating. They're not necessarily trying to create fake friends. And they're fiddling about. They're fiddling about with their mobiles. You should try and do this today. Try and count how many times you reach and touch your mobile. Just try and do a stroke count on that. It's really quite a lot. In travel, we're seeing these ADHD consumers. Somebody said to me that 25% of all travel will be purchased on mobile next year. Not true. But about 25% of all travel will be touched in some way or shape or form by mobile. The average mobile app usage is 71 seconds. Now, I'm sorry, but I can't plan and buy my product in 71 seconds. But I will consistently be looking and searching and building up. So this is multi-screen, multi-user world. Travel is very complicated. Anybody who says that it's not is lying. It is incredibly complicated. And we've got to realize that in order to reach the consumer with our products and services, the context of what we're buying and selling. So I'd like you to start thinking about the reimagining of everything. When I talked about the pragmatic consumer, I'm a baby boomer. Sorry, that's what I am. You see the gray hair? I'm actually really only 22. But baby boomers are leaving the marketplace. They're being replaced by millennials. Some of you in the audience are boomers, and some of you are millennials, and a lot of you are Gen Xers. It's funny to see what happens. We are going through a fundamental social change as boomers stop being the major influence in our society. So we're dumping first-generation technology. PCs are plateauing, tablets are expanding. How many people in the audience have a tablet? Aren't we sad? We're really sad. Okay, how many people in the audience have more than 3 Wi-Fi equipped devices? See, aren't we sad? Right? How many got more than 5? All right, so you see, we are all serially sad people because we got all this stuff and we're interacting with all this stuff. How many times, if you don't get an answer through one channel, you go and interact through another channel? Excuse me, didn't get my email. It's the most stupid thing to say to anybody. If you ever want to have a good thing, go back and read Samuel Pepys. It's very interesting to see how he wrote versus how we write today. So bring your own device and multi-screen. Very, very important change, fundamental change in how we're interacting. I actually went back and looked at my top 100 email contacts, because I can get that out of Outlook, and 22 of them do not have a landline number. It's kind of a scary thought. So what are we leaving behind? These are things we're leaving behind. Of course, this is an OPTAT tickets. Anybody remember OPTAT tickets? Yeah, probably all of us do. But they're interesting things. But so what's next? What are we leaving behind next? Cash. We're going to go to wallets, electronic wallets. Car ownership, accommodation. Big OTAs are under threat because the search companies are going into the purchase path. What's coming? These things are coming. Image-based search, contextual search. These things are almost here now. If anybody saw the Google I/O presentation, if not, please go and have a look at it. It was an amazing sort of expression about what is almost here and what is actually here. So I run a small incubator, and we've got about 7 different companies, and here's 4 of them that we're involved in, which is Pintrips, which is a true social sharing application for flight planning and management, Black Box, which solves the problem of connecting low-cost carriers. Roam to Rio, go and play with this. It's wonderful for you to get the ability to do address-to-address planning. And then Dexter for big data. Here's a couple of places that you can suggest to read. So some predictions very quickly before I turn it over to Kieron. There is a subtle but very clear migration from explicit lean forward into it's going to come to me. Find me. Don't make me come to you. Don't make me work too hard. Natural interfaces, and I think a lot of people are going to be talking about this in the coming presentations ahead. It's a multi-speed, multi-screen world. Anybody really happy with the speed on their mobile? Thank you. I wish people would stop lying how wonderful things are on an iPhone. It's crap. Sharing is caring. And yes, sharing is very important to our economy. And this is something very important. Curated trustworthy versus just crowd-worthy. The wisdom of the crowd, and if any of you haven't read the book, do read the book, but quickly if you want to read it, there's a website for this. Curated trustworthy. I need to have people who can tell me that this is good or bad, because I don't know, and I don't trust the crowd to tell me the answer. Big Dave, contextual and individual. Those 2 things, very important. So with that, I'd like to sort of thank you very much, and let me turn it over to Kieron, who's going to give you a little bit more about OpenJaw, and enjoy the day, and remember, think about the consumer. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So just a couple of minutes, maybe just setting the scene for today. We'll start off with 2 announcements I will make this morning. So over the last couple of days, we announced a strategic alliance with TravelSky, the Chinese GDS. So this is going to bring TRetailing to China. It'll bring it to ultimately 30 domestic airlines in China. Initially, it'll be around flight selling, but then we'll move into the sort of full TRetailing paradigm to take in hotel, car, and destination activities. So we're in full sort of swing development at the moment, bringing the first of those Chinese airlines into production. So we expect to go live in Q4 of this year. So we'll make an announcement in due course about the airline. We can't do it now for confidentiality reasons. So it's a big deal for us. It really sort of marks our sort of entry into the Asian marketplace and into the Chinese marketplace, which of course has just incredible sort of growth in online into the future. So second announcement is eBooks, which is the reward program of FNB. So that's the First National Bank of South Africa, and also RMB Private Bank, which is Rand Merchant Bank. So TRetail is now powering their online travel shop. So if you go to ebooks.com, it is live. It's been up for about the last 6 weeks. And in effect, we do the travel redemption around sort of flights, hotel, and car. And then the usual combination of ebooks or the actual Rand currency. So very exciting. That'll grow over time. It's a very significant loyalty program in South Africa. And it basically adds to a portfolio of loyalty customers that we have in OpenJaw. So we're very excited by that. Right, just to spend a little bit of time talking about the agenda. And yesterday we touched on these 4 principles of TRetailing. Inspire, personalize, differentiate, and convert. I'm not going to go through that. We went through it yesterday. We will touch on some of these topics today. But what we tried to do is to align the agenda to sort of touch some of these 4 principles as we go through. So let me introduce some of the speakers today. We've got Kevin May from Tnooz, and Kevin is going to deliver the keynote. You're going to touch on some of the 4 principles, Kevin. I've seen your presentation, so that's going to be very interesting. We will then have Frederic Bertz, who's the Deputy CEO of Voyage SNCF. So this is the online travel agency division of French Rail, and he's going to be talking about inspiration. So we're going to be selling the dream and not the ticket, Frederic, apparently. Okay. We then have Professor Barry Smith and Mark Lenihan, and that's going to be a joint presentation to go through personalization and to go through sort of recommender systems. It's a while, Barry, since we have seen each other. We have a past a number of years ago. So when I worked in venture capital, I looked at a company that Barry had started called Changing Worlds. It was a very interesting company. It was a mobile personalization play. Company did very well and got acquired by Amdocs in 2008 for $60 million initial consideration. So I think it's a very interesting example of somebody who's a leading sort of figure in academia in sort of personalization, actually going to industry, building a business, and ultimately exiting that business. So it's a fantastic journey, and congratulations, really excellent. Then we're going to have Nadia Sittler, and she is from CyberSource. And CyberSource is in the payment and in the fraud space, so it's a Visa-owned company. It's really a large company. I never realized just how large it was, even though many of our customers actually use CyberSource as their payment and their sort of fraud infrastructure. After lunch, Tristan, you're going to join us at 2 o'clock. And Tristan works at very senior levels in some of the world's sort of largest travel brands, and he helps the sort of C-levels develop the business case around investing in the technology platform, the sort of ROI. And you're going to tell us, Tristan, I hope, about doubling our business by becoming a travel retailer. So that's going to be a cool presentation. And then Timothy, bad boy with the Google rap sheet. We have Nicola Simonato, who is the general manager for EMEA and APAC for ITA Software, which of course is a Google company today. And that's going to be about sort of Google's view of the sort of evolving landscape around online travel, which will be fascinating. So then we go into the afternoon slot and the final slot, and one of the hot buttons at the moment is, of course, NDC, which is the new distribution capability from IATA. We have Andrei Grichenko, who is going to bring us through the basics of NDC. We're then going to have Valen Perini, who's the CEO of Open Travel, and she's going to come up on stage. We'll have some of the sort of seating back up here. And she's going to do a Focusrite style sort of talk back for 10 minutes and go through some of the sort of frequently asked questions. And if people have particular questions, bring it up with Andre or with Valen today if you want to sort of table those questions later on in this session. So that is a very important sort of development in the industry, and I think it's going to be something we'll all learn a lot from in terms of new distribution. So in the final run-in, we're going to have a panel session. We're going to have John McQuillan and Timothy moderating. It should be impactful. Shoot from the hip. And we're going to have Brian Porter, who's the e-commerce manager from Comair and Kulula, based in South Africa. So these are the 2 airlines in South Africa. We'll have Neil Sunners, who's the Group IT Director for Avis. And then we'll also have Valen joining us again as CEO of Open Travel Alliance. So it should be good. We'll finish off around 4:30. We can get out. We can enjoy the good weather that we have again ordered, especially for this event. Right, so just let's set the scene and just do a couple of slides. So one of our airline CEOs made this very interesting quote recently. And I thought it said a lot about where online travel needs to go. So there are a lot more travel products behind a successful journey than just flight tickets. But importantly, my shop is the best place to sell them. And I think you could apply this not just to be, if you're an airline CEO, if you're in the OTA space, if you're in the loyalty space. There's a lot of ancillary products that you can sell beyond your core inventory that helps somebody build their full travel itinerary. In the case of an airline, they're particularly uniquely positioned because most people will purchase the flight before they purchase any other part of your travel itinerary. So how do we sort of get to this point? Well, how we get to it is not how we've been looking at this sort of past. If you look at travel brands today, pretty much most travel brands are failing to maximize sort of their ancillary sales. They may have no ancillaries, they may have ancillaries that they're not selling all that well, or they simply may be passing control of the ancillary selling to third parties. And we're going to just have a quick look at, if you go back over the last 10 years since, say, 2002, this is kind of my sort of summary of what I think the evolving sort of strategies have been around conversion and around retailing. So simple click-through, fantastic model for meta search, but if you're in the sort of, if you're in the industry to actually transact and sell product yourself, click-through is a pretty poor conversion strategy. White label, it's very appealing, it's very simple. You pick up a commission check at the end of the month, but it isn't very optimal. And what is actually happening on sort of white label microsites is you're passing control from your own travel flow, your selling flow, to a third party. So you're losing the context of the overall journey, and you're basically passing up sort of revenue and margin. Yes, you will get your commission, but it's not enough. And then cross-sell has been a real mix. Some people do cross-sell incredibly poorly. It's post-booking, it's through literally a white label site. Whereas the really optimal cross-sell, which is in-pat, where you get some fantastic sort of conversion rates, is very powerful. And people that have done it very well actually benefit considerably from the in-pat booking using cross-sell. Dynamic packaging, it has a whole lot of advantages. It can be difficult to implement. For those airlines that have implemented it really well, it is a stunning commercial success. So if you want to go to BA.com and see how they do dynamic packaging, right from the home page, how do you do cross-sell in terms of their booking flows, how do you do switch sell, how do you do combine and save sort of psychologies, it's absolutely phenomenal in terms of what they've achieved on dynamic packaging. So I think dynamic packaging has a huge opportunity, especially around the distressed sort of channel inventory and the opaque pricing. And then if we want to get on to travel retailing, which we think is the nirvana, it's very simple. We just want to be able to take travel brands and make them full travel retailers. So in effect, we're talking about just getting to a one-stop shop. So all of your travel products, in a complete sort of branded experience as you go through the sort of booking flow. All products in the one place. We went through pricing yesterday. We went through our pricing pipeline. We went through the sort of changes. We went through what you can do with a really powerful engine to change pricing and to change sort of conversion psychology. Things like dynamic packaging, for example, are immensely powerful because we can sell a combined product cheaper than we can sell the individual components due to using opaque pricing and distressed inventory. So it really is an advantage, and people should leverage price as far as possible. And then obvious things, receiving all of the revenue instead of passing your business onto the third party. And for me, the most important is in the one-stop shop approach, in the TRetailing approach, it's 100% customer ownership. So it's controlling the journey from start to end. You're selling all of the itinerary, you're getting all of the revenue, and you're set up again for when that customer comes back to you. So I think that's really cool. So with that, and hopefully that sets the scene for today in terms of travel retailing, we're going to now pretty much open it up to all of our industry speakers for today. So I wish you the best, and at 4:30 I look forward to the sun outside, so thank you.
It's good to see that OpenJaw can indeed organise a piss-up in a brewery. Yeah? I was rehearsing that one all the way along the lift here while I was walking over it. No, it was a good night.
So I heard you couldn't make your 10 o'clock or your 8 o'clock appointment to come here.
Yeah, enough of that one. I was thinking of doing the whole presentation using just lines from U2. But no, I won't do. So, I'm Kevin May. I'm the editor and one of the co-founders of Tnooz.com. If you haven't heard of us, we're a global B2B media site. We write about travel technology. We've been around for about 3.5 years. We've got a big team. Timothy, I have to do a disclosure here, does write for Tnooz every now and again. Not enough, but he does write for us every now and again. So does Valen Perini, who's sat next to him as well. So 2 of our contributors, and we've got about 3 or 4 reporters. Yeah, that's what we do. I'm not an expert. I've never worked in the industry. I've just written about it for the last 7 or 8 years now. So, and I think the purpose of me being here today is just to kind of talk to you a little bit about where we see things going. Not specifically from a product perspective, but just, you know, it says here 2023, which is a ridiculously long time to try and predict things, but we're going to kind of look at the way things are going in the short, medium, and long term. And one of the things that we do at Tnooz is that we look at everything to do with travel technology through these kind of 4 pillars, as we call them. We think that the engine room of the industry is basically based on one of these 4 things, and often they all kind of interact. So it's all about distribution. Increasingly, it's about devices. It's an awful lot about social, and I don't just mean social media. We're talking about social commerce as well. Social media is something quite different, and obviously marketing, which kind of where we look at things about, you know, what marketing, advertising, from a Google perspective, a lot. So that's what we do. And most of the things that we write about, we always try and kind of frame around one of these 4 things. So, and often they are interlinked. So you can't write about an app on devices without it having some relevance to marketing and also to distribution. So TRetailing, or retailing, as you've heard from the boys already, is really exciting. It's interesting. It's where the industry is going. Travel brands want to become more like retailers, and when you're looking ahead to something as far forward as 2023, you often get this idea about generations, which is what Timothy was doing. So that's Timothy. I thought Timothy was going to be really unkind to me when he introduced me earlier, so I thought I'd throw this picture in just in case. And unfortunately, he's been really pleasant so far, so I'm feeling marginally guilty about putting this in. But now, he is slightly older than I am. I'm 40, Timothy is 75, I think, next year. But the point is that there is this perception that people that are older than I am are slightly behind the curve when it comes to interacting with brands and each other online. Now, I am going to say something nice about Timothy. Timothy was probably one of the first people I spoke to about Twitter, going back, what, 4 or 5 years. We were discussing what this microblogging thing was going to be all about. And Timothy gets it, but he's not alone in that age group. My mum and dad are Facebook users. They book their travel online these days. They have moved away from the agent space, so they do book everything online. So to say that what's going to happen is really at a different age group from where Timothy is wrong. So this is me, and this is actually with Valen as well. This was us in Singapore last year. We were looking at my phone. We were taking pictures. We were doing a hackathon in Singapore, and everybody was playing with their phones. This is what my generation does. We live, as Timothy was saying, we live and breathe with our phones. I started doing the thing where it's counting how many times I touched my phone earlier, and I lost count after about 5 or 6 minutes. The point is that we're constantly looking at our devices, we're interacting, we're saving pictures, we're sharing pictures, we're tweeting each other, we're sending text messages and things like this. So that's my generation. This is my son, Sam. He's now 5. This was taken about 3 years ago in the Science Museum in London. It's quite a cute picture. I quite like showing it. The point is that a couple of weeks before that, Sam and his sister and I and my wife, we went to an event in a country house in Kent. It was a summer barbecue. And they had, does anyone remember the Microsoft Surface tables? I don't know, are they still kicking about? They were...
Some around.
Yeah, they're basically tables, say, about 5 foot by 3 foot. And it was essentially an enormous iPad, but it was made by Microsoft. This was actually before the iPad came along. Little Sam, who was about three at the time, walked straight up to this device. His sister, who's 3 years older than him, started looking at it as well. And they just stood there, and he instinctively knew what to do with it. He was following, there was a little game on there where you had to take bring a snake along and wind it around these kind of this little course. And he knew straight away what to do. Gesture interaction with that generation is something that we can't even comprehend because they haven't been used to keyboards. I mean, when we were actually in the Science Museum, there was a dial phone, and he had no idea what to do with a dial phone. But when he got to that, which was in the middle of the Science Museum, he assumed it was one of those Microsoft Surface tables again. It wasn't, it was just a light box. So he went up to it, and he was trying to do all these things, and then he got bored, and then he laid down, and I took a cute picture. The point is that the way he interacts with technology is completely different to the way I interact with it. He's very natural. You should see him using an iPad. He knows exactly what to do. And he's had no, of course he hasn't had any formal training, he's 5. But the point is that, they know how to use devices, and they will interact with devices in very different ways. So, this is the OpenJaw mantra, isn't it, around TRetailing: inspire, personalize, differentiate, and convert. I was talking to Mark from OpenJaw a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the presentation, and he was going through OpenJaw's four pillars. Do you call them 4 pillars as well? 4 principles. And we started matching them up against what our 4 pillars are. This presentation will be made available, so you don't have to squint too much to read it. And we put this grid together so that you can see how our 4 pillars interact with their 4 principles. Some of that's quite obvious, and we'll go through some examples in a little while. But the point is that all of the things that we see in our 4 pillars, there is something in there when you put it against the 4 principles. So, for example, devices and inspire. So it's all about people are using their tablets for inspiration. They're doing their travel planning on their tablets. There was a great piece of research by a company called 101 Holidays. It's an online travel site in the UK, and they were looking at their traffic to their site on different particular days of the week and what devices people were using. And they found that the most popular time that people were looking at their site to get ideas for travel products was on a Sunday evening on a tablet. So there couldn't be specific as to whether it was an iPad or not. But what people were doing is they were sitting in front of the TV, so here we go, multi-devices, multitasking, so we're watching the TV, and we're sitting there with our tablets, and we may be chatting to our friends and family and partners and starting to talk about where we might want to go. This is actually why, interestingly, why TV advertising for travel still exists. This is why Thomas Cook, for example, spends a lot of money on TV advertising and travel supermarket and people like that, because they've realised that when people are sitting there in front of the TV and they see an inspirational ad for a travel product and they've got their tablet in front of them, they'll look it up straight away. They see enormous spikes in traffic to travel websites when there's a TV ad campaign running at the same time. So that's just one example of this kind of cross-section between inspiration and devices. And you could say you can sit and stare at that forever, but that's the principles. So TRetailing in a B2C world, there's a couple of things that we see. This is the kind of the consumer experience of what T-retailing is and where we think it's going to go. Less so at the moment, but this is now we're starting to look forward. So inventory management, which is a kind of a flaky way of saying, you know, it's a lot easier, or it will be a lot easier for a consumer to just handle what they're doing with their travel products when they go online, when they book it. So, for example, the TripIt model, which is trip planning on a sort of itinerary management on a device, it's quite good. It's been around for a while. TripIt's been around for, what, 2 or 3 years? Something like that? Yeah, 5 years. But that ability to manage your own inventory and manage your booking online and do all the other things that you would like to do with it, we think is going to be a really, really important, and that's a B2C element here. Better and more relevant product. Now, because of things like big data, where companies are able to capture a lot more information about a consumer, we would hope, going forward in this T-retailing world, that we'd actually be able to target people with better and more relevant product to those consumers. Now, this takes time. Big data isn't something that you can switch on straight away, and big data, indeed, is a term that probably gets overused. I mean, you talk to a GDS, for example, and say, what are your thoughts on big data? And they say, well, we've been a big data company for decades, which essentially they have. They just haven't been using it in the way that some other companies think about big data. But the point is, the more data that you collect about your customers, the more you can refine over time what you're able to offer them. That's the idea around producing more and better relevant product for them. The upselling capability, upselling is a really big thing in the T-retailing world. It's very simple. It's just that. I mean, what people want to be able to do is if they have a flight and a hotel and they want to put something extra on the end, like a tour and activity, like that car hire, being able to do that within a single place online is where this is going to go. And I don't think many companies do it particularly well because the user experience is often not very good, which is why the conversion rates on upselling aren't particularly high. Indeed, the conversion rates just online for online booking and travel is pretty low anyway. And this leads finally into the user experience. And this is where at the moment, the user experience on a lot of websites, and Timothy, this is one of his things, he really talks a lot about user experience, is not particularly good. You go onto a website, you're thrust with you're thrown lots of offers, and you often don't know how to kind of go through them and work out which one is the best one for you. The web user experience is quite poor, so there's no way to go back and forward and things like that. I mean, this is really simple stuff, but a lot of travel sites really don't get it, and this is where they're going to be forced to get it going forward because of all the other things that are going on in competition. But the user experience is a really, really important one here. So, T-retailing and the B2B side of things. So we talked a little bit about big data. It's about making sure that you're collecting as much data as you possibly can about a customer, and then applying it to those things that we talked about on the first screen. Social graph mining, and this is also, you're starting to see how lots of these things are linked. So social graph mining is essentially just using the data that you can get from your customers that is either public or which they're happy to share with you. I mean, Twitter is public data. Facebook is private data, but if someone connects to your brand via Facebook and they give you permission to look at everything, there's an absolute goldmine of information about a particular customer, about your customers there, which allows you then, going forwards with the targeting relevant offers and stuff like that. There's a couple of companies that are doing the social graph mining particularly well. A promotional campaign that gets brought up a lot was the thing that KLM did a couple of years ago, a thing called KLM Surprise. Hands up who heard of KLM Surprise? A few of you. So this is social graph mining for a promotion. So what they did, KLM, the airline, what they wanted to do was surprise some of their passengers. So when a passenger was checking in and buying a ticket, they worked out whether they were Foursquare users, which is the social check-in system, and whether they were Twitter users. And a few of these passengers, they started digging in really deeply into what they were saying publicly in social media. And they worked out that some of those passengers were quite active and vociferous about what they were doing when they were going on the trip, or the ticket that they just booked with KLM. So, for example, what happened was when a passenger was checking in at Schiphol Airport, they were flying off to the US, they identified one of the passengers that had been talking about they were going to, what's the baseball team in Boston? The Red Sox. Yeah, so, well, you live in Boston, that's why I asked you. They realized that one of these passengers was going to a baseball game in Boston. So they went up to them in the terminal after they checked in on Foursquare so that they knew they were there, and they went up to them with a Red Sox baseball hat and said, "Have a nice flight. This is a present from KLM." And they took pictures of them and they put it up on Facebook, and everyone was like, "Oh, isn't KLM wonderful and lovely?" But it was just a promo campaign, and it got the likes of Tnooz to write about it as a good use of social graph mining. But you can start to see what you're able to get from passenger data that they're just tweeting or putting on Facebook and things like that. Flexible partnerships. This is something that Valen and I were talking about last week. In order for a lot of this retailing stuff to actually work, the industry actually needs to be a little bit better at communicating and having agreements with each other. It's an incredibly fragmented industry, and a lot of the time companies just don't get along. If you want to be able to do some of the principles that you're going to be hearing about today around retailing, the industry is really going to have to work out how to get along better and work together. It's easier said than done, and yeah, if it was a big industry loving, it wouldn't give us at Tnooz a lot of stuff to write about. But the point is, because we like disagreements and things like that. But a lot of this stuff really does depend on the industry collaborating more, sharing knowledge, sharing data, sharing partnerships and things like that. And finally, the last one, which is Timothy's big thing, is trust. If you want to be able to, as travel brands, do a lot of this retailing principles, you're really going to need your consumer to trust you more than they probably do at the moment. There is some data coming out of Google, we think, in the next week or so that's going to talk about how many websites that people visit before they make a booking. They've had this piece of research around for a couple of years. It's often quoted. On average, consumers look at 22 websites before they make a booking. That number is apparently coming down, and Google is about to announce that next week or in a couple of weeks. Whether that is because consumers are more trustworthy of other brands or whether they're just fed up with looking at lots of websites is unclear. But the point is that if you want to be able to do all these things, as I said, you really need to be able to have better trust from your consumers in order to do it. So the whole point around retailing is actually that you want to remove the friction between what you're able to offer and what consumers want to get from you. There's too much friction at the moment. It's fiddly to do things. It goes to the user experience perspective that we were talking about earlier. The more removing of this friction that you can do, the more chance, or the better the chance that you're going to be able to put into play some of this retailing principles. So what I wanted to do for the next part is go through some of the things that we see over the next 10 years, if we're looking at this 2023 thing, and just some of them are relating to retail, some of them less so, but they're things that are happening in the industry that is really going to affect the way consumers interact with you and with each other and with other travel brands. Excuse me a second. The air conditioning in here is making my throat very dry, sorry. So yeah, SEO, meta search, semantic search, it's all evolving. Some of it happening right now, some of it's going to happen a little bit more in the future. What we've seen in the last year or so is online travel agencies suddenly realizing that the media model or meta search is actually quite interesting. We saw Priceline paid $1.8 billion for Kayak, which kind of made a few people's eyes start watering, and obviously lots of other meta search companies suddenly thought, hey, we've got a chance of a decent exit here. If Kayak can go for $1.8 billion, maybe us as a meta search company might be able to go out for something similar. So OTAs are interested in media, so that changes the way they interact with each other and their suppliers. Semantic search is something that most people have kind of heard about, but there's very few sites that are actually doing it, and it's essentially, there's a couple of things to semantic search, but one of the ways is free text, so you can actually just type in, I want to go to Ibiza this weekend with 2 friends and go clubbing, and the results come back that are incredibly relevant, and which is obviously what you want. So if you type that into Google at the moment, it's really, really messy. But you're starting to see some companies that are travel organizations that are getting into this semantic search. Disclosure, my co-founder at Tnooz is a guy called Fred Lalonde. His main day job is CEO of a company called Hopper, which has been in alpha for about 3,000 years or something. But that is essentially a semantic search engine. It's very interesting. They are doing demos to people if you want to go and have a look at it. But what Hopper is heading down this semantic search route. The reason why I've put Google, Facebook, and Apple on here is that, and Timothy and I are going to talk about this, I think, at the Q&A at the end, and talk about Amazon, is that these companies are great because they are disruptors. You know, none of these companies are travel companies at all. Some would say that Google is a travel company in the sense that it takes a lot of money from the travel industry for pay-per-click advertising. Unless we forget, Google, where's our ITA person? Hello, sir. You know, hi. Google, you know, doesn't spend $700 million on a company and just for the hell of it. At the time, 3 years ago, when it acquired ITA Software, it was, I think it was in the top 7 or 8 purchases Google had ever made. Less so now. But the point is that Google getting into travel is interesting from our perspective because we like to write about it. It's made the industry sit up and listen, what on earth is Google doing? What we think Google is doing is really interesting in that it is creating a jigsaw. Now, all of the things that Google does in isolation, so it's launched Hotel Finder, it's done Google Flight Search, you've got Google Local, you've got Google Maps, you've got, it bought Frommer's, it bought Zagat. All these things in isolation, you say, yeah, okay, yeah, that's interesting. Once you start putting all this stuff together, Google is slowly building a jigsaw of a travel product. Now, I don't believe for a second that they will get into the transaction space and become an OTA. I think they'd be pretty silly to do that because that's messy and you have to do customer service and fulfillment and all those kind of things. But as a facilitator for people to be involved in travel, Google is doing some really interesting things. Facebook is very different. It's an enabler for travel, we think. And Apple is, you know, it's a device manufacturer. But a couple of years ago, Apple decided to file some patents with the US Patent Office for something called iTravel, which is essentially a native app that would sit on the front page of your iOS device that would take you through to some travel services. Now, we don't think that that Apple would go down the Google route and buy a travel technology company like ITA. We think it would probably partner with people. But the fact that Apple is sniffing around the industry more than just being a device manufacturer is interesting. We suspect something will happen on that reasonably soon. So responsive design, touch. We talked about my son Sam and how the way he interacts with technology is much more around gestures and things like that. If you haven't, website owners here, are your websites responsively designed now? Silence. Does anyone know what responsive design means? Nobody. That's probably why you all are quiet. So responsive design means essentially you visit a web brand on a desktop and then you can move across to a tablet and you can move across to a mobile and the site changes and stretches and the content changes the way you move things around. It's quite simple, but the point is with more people using devices to interact with travel brands, if your travel brand is not mobile enabled, that's pretty silly. You should go and do that tomorrow if it isn't. But then you really need to start thinking a little bit more about responsive design and how people interact with you online. This is that user experience thing. How people interact with you online when they use gestures and touch, not when they use a mouse and they click. So the social graph, we talked a little bit about that. We think it's going to make good business sense eventually, over time. Still, it's 2 years old already, but still the best example, apart from the KLM thing, the best example of the social graph being used in a retail environment is done by TripAdvisor. 2 years ago, it launched a service called Trip Friends, which essentially meant when you go onto tripadvisor.com and you're also logged into Facebook at the same time, when you look at a hotel, it tells you whether your Facebook friends have stayed in that hotel as well. And it brings up their reviews way up higher than the other reviews that you get on TripAdvisor. You talk to Steve Kaufer, who's the president and CEO and one of the co-founders of TripAdvisor, and he starts to talk about this shift away from the wisdom of crowds to wisdom of friends. I don't think this is anything to do with TripAdvisor not being seen as trusted. It's actually about consumers wanting, because they have the ability through technology, to get more information about their hotel or a tour and activity that they're looking at on TripAdvisor, because they understand and they appreciate that if their friend has gone there and they liked it, and they like their friends and they know they've got the similar interests, there's a higher chance that they will trust that review more than they'll trust one of the reviews from gazillions of other strangers. So over time, I think we'll see a lot more of this integration with Facebook and the social graph, just to allow people to make their shopping and their retail decisions online in a better way and in a more trustworthy way. So NFC, near-field communication, is going to become, we think, the primary method in which people interact with travel brands for things like the airport experience. So NFC, it's difficult to, it's actually difficult to describe in some respects. It allows people to, in this case, check in for a flight or with the use of mobile boarding pass and things like that. But where it really starts going, where it gets interesting, is rather than just scanning, it's actually the whole experience being used, the whole experience of travel being administered via a mobile device. There's some really interesting technology coming around this. There's baggage tracking and things like that, all done from a phone. CETA, which is obviously most of you know, is doing some interesting things around apps and NFC and things like that. So watch out what they're doing. But NFC will just become, it'll be so natural, we won't even actually overthink it, as I suspect many people are at the moment. Oh, do we need to have an NFC-enabled device and all this kind of thing? It will just happen. We will start using our mobiles as much as we do using a desktop. So, geofencing, which is a really weird term, but it's actually really clever and it's really interesting. And you can see an example here. This was a courtesy of one of our nodes, Glenn Gruber at Nest Technologies. Now, geofencing is really interesting because it uses your mobile device and your GPS positioning to allow people to locate where you are. Now, this isn't a creepy thing. This is actually useful, and you can start to see now where this goes, where this fits in with the retailing. So, this is Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in the middle there, and assuming you're in a cab on your way to the airport, when you get to that outer zone, you get a message. It works out where you are, and it will tell you, oh, okay, so the flight is running late, or I'm running late, so can you automatically rebook me onto the next flight or find me a new connection? As you get even closer, it will tell you the gate, or if the gate has changed, and then there's various other circles here, so you can get offer upgrades. Do you really want to have priority boarding? I know it's last minute, but you know, pay now and we can get you upgraded and things like that. And then when you get to the airport, actually arrive at the airport, it can start sending you offers for things that are in the lounge and things like that. So this is that retailing thing, but using technology. And essentially, this is what geofencing is. It's using the location of a phone and indeed the person that's holding it to help them. Smart cities and airports will be built. This is the one that it's going to be, or was proposed to be, in the Thames Estuary, Boris Island. But it looks like a really cool airport, doesn't it? Forget the design. It's the stuff that's inside that's going to be really interesting. And it will start, when you start to think about geofencing and NFC and everyone using their mobiles, we'll see a lot more of this kind of technology. There's a story that's going to go up on Tnooz in a couple of hours about something that's going on at LaGuardia, where they're using iPads. They're going around people as they're at the gate, and with their iPads, and they're saying, do you want some food? Yes, do you want some food? Do you want us to take you to the duty free? There's all these kind of things. They're using technology just to make the passenger experience better. Now, who actually likes going to airports? It's a function, isn't it? It takes us from A to B. That's the reason we go there. There's very few people, maybe Timothy does because he's a bit of a geek, but very few people go to the airport just for the hell of it. They go there because they want to get somewhere. So anything to improve that passenger experience within an airport is obviously a good thing, but this is what is going to happen. So the live tech experience is actually going to be good for everybody. Right, does anyone know what that is, what that picture is, where that picture is? It looks like an Apple store, doesn't it? This is actually the Manchester Tourism Office in Deansgate or somewhere like that. So I don't know if I've not been there, we just wrote a story about it a couple of years ago. And what they realised was that tourism board offices, I haven't been to the one in Dublin, I'm sure it's fine, but if it's anything like lots of the ones in London, you go in and you've got racks of pamphlets, sightseeing, bus tours, blah, 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 blah. And so you go in and you pick up a pamphlet and you leave and it's all quite, there's no enjoyment there. You go there, it means to an end. What they did was they realised that people like going in and playing around. They've made, these are kind of like Microsoft Surface tables, which you can see here, when you can go in and you can look to see what's going on in Manchester, and you can make a booking for a hotel, all using these devices here. It's become incredibly popular, this place in Manchester. But they just took a completely different approach. They realised that people like going to the Apple stores because Apple stores are quite cool. They're nice places to hang out. So why don't do the same here? Free Wi-Fi, so visitors can come in and get their phone out and check their email and stuff like that. So recommendation systems are not annoying. I find Amazon's recommendation system at the moment slightly annoying because often it doesn't really work. It says somebody who bought this book also bought this book. You might like this book because someone has rated it and things like that. When they start plugging in, going back to the social graph thing, when they start plugging in the data from people that I know, that I like, and I respect that they will like book X, and then it says, your friend Timothy O'Neill Dunn also read this book and he liked it, and this was the next book that he bought, I'm probably going to be interested in that because Timothy's read it, rather than just the recommendation systems at the moment. I just find them a little bit irritating, but I think this is going to evolve once we start plugging in more of the social data. So, APIs, no longer alien and threatening. So this is a little story about why APIs were perceived to be, we think, slightly threatening to the industry. We did our first hackathon 2 years ago in London. And the idea around our hackathons is that we get lots of developers together. Companies release their developers for a few days. You know, they're like this, they haven't seen sunlight for years because they're developers and things like that. But what we did is we get them all together and we give them loads of industry APIs. These APIs are opened up for developers to play with. Now, there's a very big travel company that we worked with on that particular project back then, that we went through months of trying to persuade them to do this, because they couldn't see the value in opening up their API for developers to play with. And their lawyers back in the US were saying, well, this is our API and we don't want people playing with it. And why do we want to let other developers play with our API? We've got the best developers on the planet working for us. Why do we want other developers to play with it? And we were lucky that we had an evangelist for our hackathons that worked within Expedia that kept on saying to Expedia, I've given the name away as you can tell now, kept on saying to them, well, the point is that yes, we might have the cleverest developers on the planet, but why don't we just let other people do it? Because what they might produce might inspire us. to go and go ahead and build another product. And we had the same kind of conversations with lots of travel companies. They just didn't see the value in opening up their APIs to people to play with. They saw it as a threat. And what's actually happened, and I'm not saying that Tnooz is responsible for this, but we are one of the only people that does these hackathons, publicly anyway, is that travel companies are starting to get the fact that if you let people play with your APIs a lot more, you'll get something interesting that comes out of it. And the industry generally, we think, is starting to see that at a wider scale. Now, OpenJaw had an announcement yesterday about your developer community, is that right? Tribe, yes. So, I mean, this is another one, you know, the three GDSs have got these developer networks and things like that. So they're all starting to see that there's value in letting more collaborative developing going on. Personalized distribution, I say finally happens. We've all been talking about NDC for, it feels like years. It's actually only June last year where NDC started really being talked about openly, wasn't it? So this is a screenshot that Timothy has provided to us. Personalized distribution, and this really is at the heart of what's going on with a lot of the retail stuff, is interesting. Because if you're an airline and you're able to offer a consumer what you think they are going to want, because you've been mining their data for years, you know a lot about their history, you know who they travel with, you know what their favorite meal is. Eventually, you'll probably know what they watch when they're on board, because they'll do this, you know, they'll do it through their devices, or they'll pre-book films that they want to watch. Over time, this kind of personalized distribution, getting the right offer to them at the right time with the right type of product, going back to the better and relevant product, you can now start to see where something like NDC or NDC type initiatives, and let's say the GDSs are also moving down this route as well, it just becomes a better retail experience for the consumer if they're getting a better product than what they thought they might get. So BRICS set the standard. Brazil, Russia, India and China. It's good to see OpenJaw working with TravelSky in China. That country is opening up. I think it's only going to open up further. You see the technical powerhouses in Bangalore in India. We have an office there in India now as well. When we've been running our hackathons, the most exciting stuff that we've seen come out of any of the developers has generally come from those in Southeast Asia. They're slightly more imaginative. They work really, really hard. And they don't like failing. I don't know if that's a cultural thing, but they really want to strive hard to achieve things. And when you take that generally as to what might be happening going forward, you'll see a lot more of the innovation, we think, in the industry coming from these countries rather than, I'm sure it will come from Dublin as well, but you'll see a lot more general innovation coming from these countries than perhaps, say, where the innovation is supposedly coming from, which is in the US and in particular Silicon Valley, etc. So augmented reality finally finds a purpose. Now this is TripAdvisor's now abandoned attempt at augmented reality. It's actually quite cool. It's just at the moment that nobody was using it, so they've scrapped it. But the idea was that if you had your iPad and you were walking down this particular street in the US and you held your iPad up like this and used the camera on your iPad, you'd suddenly be bombarded with all this information because it recognized what you were looking at. That's quite cool. That's really clever technology. So it throws you up a map. It's telling you where the nearest restaurant is, what the rating is for that restaurant. There's the hotel you're staying in, etc., etc. These are the things to do. And obviously, as you move it around, all the icons and everything change at the same time because it's dynamically working out what you're looking at. Now, the reason why at this stage this thing really hasn't taken off is because I haven't seen anybody, for example, walking around Trafalgar Square in London with their phone or their iPad going, oh, look, that's Nelson's column. Of course it's Nelson's column. You know what it is. You're looking at it. I don't think at this stage that it's quite ready, but I think it probably will. I mean, this is why TripAdvisor took it offline for a while, just because no one was using it. But they say, you know, they're really interested in the technology. It's just putting it all together over time that will actually eventually happen. Sorry? That's my next Analytics to the power of 10. I mean, analytics, we're obsessed with analytics at Tnooz. We look through our Google Analytics every morning. We look through what happens, the way people interact with us on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And we're just a media brand. You know, the more you look at your own analytics and the way people are using your websites or your mobile services or your digital services, just the more information that you'll have that's relevant to you will help you shape your product, it'll help you shape your roadmaps, your user experience and design roadmaps and things like that. It's a really simple thing to say, but I mean, analytics is really probably one of the most important disciplines in any new breed kind of technology company and indeed travel company. If you don't have people that are solely responsible for looking at your web analytics and things like that, you really should do. There you go, Google Glass, sir. So Google Glass, you know, it's one of those things at the moment where people are looking at it going, it's kind of cute. You've got all the tech press on the west coast of the US that are gushing over it. They think it's brilliant. And, you know, I wouldn't wear a pair of glasses like that because I want to see, I don't want to have a camera in the corner. But, you know, you can see over time, no pun intended, that this stuff really is going to come on. People are going to have digitally enabled glasses. Why would I wear glasses that can show me where I'm going in front of me? I can see where I'm going. But the point is that we are information-hungry consumers. We want to have everything at our fingertips, so why do we need to pick up our phone out of our pocket when there's a device that can actually show us in the corner of our eye? You know, this is Minority Report and all this kind of stuff, but it's going to happen. You think of 2023, what's happened going back to 2003 and how far technology has evolved in the last 10 years? You know, this kind of stuff in 2023 is probably going to be commonplace. Yes, we might not be all walking around with glasses all the time, but just think about the travel experience and the travelers and people that are using this kind of stuff. So it'll actually become useful and also hopefully cooler. She does look a bit silly, I think, wearing those glasses. Has anyone, our ITA person's probably used some Google Glass, have you?
We don't have that many around, unless you are directly involved with the project. So no, I'm afraid I'm still waiting myself.
You're still waiting yourself, right. So, to wrap up, so who actually wins in all this? When all this stuff starts coming together, we hope and we presume that technology is an enabler, as in something to inspire people, travellers when they're going through that retail experience. We hope the consumers will win. Surely those are the most important people in this whole ecosystem, is the consumer. And if you start putting all these things that we've talked about together, I think the consumer will win, because they're information hungry, they're bored with it being a bad user experience when they go online. They're bored, they're fed up with getting bad product and bad product ideas. So over time, like I said, once all this stuff starts to come together, we think the consumer will win. Now, obviously, the industry will win as well, because happy consumers equal happy partners, equal happy industry. The reason why, lastly then, I put the question mark, a future you will create, which was a statement originally, and then I put the question mark at the end. I'm not sure whether the industry is ready generally for a lot of this stuff that's happening, which is why we talk about it a lot on Tnooz, because we think a lot of this stuff should be happening. Now, obviously, you've got your own roadmaps, you've got your own priorities, and to suddenly say, well, we're not going to look into X product for a while because we're going to go and concentrate on augmented reality is a bit silly. What we need to think is a little bit more in the short to medium term as to what is actually happening, and make sure that you are one of the people that is going to help create this future for your consumers and for yourselves and for your partners. So the opportunity is there. That's why the question mark is there. The opportunity is there really for people to kind of capitalise on all this stuff. And I hope that it is the future that you will create yourselves. Let's launch it. Thank you.
Can you turn my mic on? Right. So thanks very much, Kevin. We've got a little bit of time before 10:50 before we go to coffee, and I'm sure you're all dying and gagging for coffee, or at least dying or gagging for sunlight, if nothing else. But here's an opportunity to sort of now think about this. So if some of you'd like to ask a question, as I said, we do have Emma and Amanda somewhere with mics, but feel free to raise your hand and I'll come back and identify. But I've got a couple of questions for Kevin. So if we look at the business here, we all have things like budgets and product roadmaps that we're all supposed to adhere to. Do we start to like throw some of that stuff out? Do we actually have to start thinking now differently about how we actually go through the process of how we plan a product for the future? What do we do now? Because you made a whole lot of very bold statements and said 2023. Actually, some of that stuff is here now. Mm-hmm. If any of you can go and have a look at the Google Now presentation from I/O, that is amazing about context-aware devices. And Google is now, if you've got an Android, how many people got Android devices? Right, so, ooh, look, that side's all the Apple side, right? This side's all the Android device. Ooh, it's kind of scary, isn't it? If on your phone now, try it. Download Google Now, and it's amazing how context, you're going to start to see context, location-aware, geofencing type information arriving to you. Sydney Airport, for anybody who tries it, actually has a huge project going on with this right now. So the question then is this. Do we need to rethink how we go about our product design and our product planning? Do we need to rethink that?
Yeah, and I saw you nodding in the background as well. Yes, of course. That's the short answer is yes, I think you do. Because so much of, as we said, so much of this stuff is starting to happen now. So I don't think you're ripping up your current roadmap, but you just got to start thinking about some of the things that are coming on, because I'm a firm believer that consumer drives a lot of the change. Obviously, you have companies that allow people to do things technically, but I think that desire by consumers for better interaction, more relevancy, trust, which is your favourite thing, Timothy, they want all these kind of things. And if you aren't thinking like the consumer, which is probably the more important part here, and if you're just thinking like a company instead of thinking like a consumer, maybe that's where you're possibly going wrong.
Right, so a lot of people here are involved in the deep side of technology. A lot of people here are dealing with the bits and bytes of things. How do we have to look at now that interaction with the customer? How do we actually get to that guy? How do we know what he's like? If we don't have the benefit of going and mining the social graph, where do we start? Where do we start to get that information?
We talk to them, I guess.
How?
That's a flippant answer.
I know, but how?
Well, you find out as much about them as you possibly can through the original methods that you probably did with customer satisfaction surveys and things like that. I'm assuming travel companies still do those.
Yeah.
But you can start tailoring what you're asking them within those kind of surveys to find out a little bit more about them. And what some of the things that they want, which is the important stuff. Right. What is it they want going forward?
So Ben's Survey Monkey, shall we? Pete's Survey Monkey. Yes, John.
So you talked about APIs,
mm-hmm.
And
hold a second, John. What I'd like you to do is identify yourself, John.
John McQuillan from OpenJaw. You talked about APIs, and you talked about them really, I suppose, in the context of the hackathons. But some of the figures that I've seen suggest that, for some of the big companies, they're actually getting more of their traffic through their API than they are through their direct interfaces. Twitter, for example. So in the travel retailing space, do you think the API can be a revenue opportunity, and can you increase your bookings by making your API available?
You look what Expedia has done with its affiliate network, and that's API based. Expedia is making a big play with its EAN service because it sees the way to expand its own product reach, and therefore revenue opportunity is by allowing people to embed the EAN API so that, for example, an airline can sell hotels on the back of it. So I think, yes, it is a revenue opportunity if you do it, if you get it right. And I think Expedia is getting it right because they talk about they've got millions of partners now that are people that are using their API. So yes, it must be a revenue opportunity. You know, Expedia doesn't do things for the love of it, does it? So yeah, I think it is. There is a revenue opportunity if you get it right. I would say probably about 3/4 of the press releases, for example, that we get out of Expedia these days are nothing to do with the core product. It's about what they're doing with EAN. So it's very important for them.
Actually, Chris Wallace, where are you?
He's actually, he couldn't make it to go to a meeting.
Oh, darn it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So I was going to pick on him. Darn it. Yeah, I think that this issue about partnerships, and maybe this is something we can just pick up because we've got a couple more minutes. So partnerships, one of the issues, obviously, with technology in the good old days is once you had a particular form of API, you put a lot of investment in there, you go through the cycles of certification, and then, wow, you go, great, I've done it. And that process took you 9 freaking months to get the thing done. Today, we've got to think about partnerships that have to be done overnight. How can we evolve? Because Expedia has a fairly tortuous process today in the EAN, but they're really trying very hard to open that up so that people can actually consume the APIs almost in real time. So are we going to see that APIs are basically out there in the wild, and that the certification process that, you know, I can remember CETA certification for workstations used to take 3 years. You know, for you to attach a PC, a particular brand of PC to a device. What do you think?
I mean, it goes to what we were saying right at the beginning of the presentation about flexible working and better kind of understanding within organisations, so that you kind of bring down these kind of barriers for all this stuff to work. I think if companies are slightly more agile in the way they think, and I'm not talking about the agile development process, but agile in their kind of strategy and the way that they want to work, I think it will only get better. As we're seeing, there are so many more travel APIs that are being made available now. Sometimes you have to pay to use them, for example, things like that. But there's a lot more now than there were 4 or 5 years ago. Is it Programmable Web, Valen, which is the one that lists? Programmable Web has a list of all the travel APIs that you can go and play with. That was probably a fraction of the number on there a few years ago. I think companies are realising that there is value in letting people, as I was saying, there's value in letting people play with the APIs and seeing what they can come up with, and indeed become partners with them.
Right. I mean, if anybody wants to actually spend a little time with Valen, she's CEO of the Open Travel Alliance, and she has to field a lot of these questions almost every day about how do I do this. And I think that that's what's happening now, is there's a new breed of developer out there who is actually really intent on creating these new products. So one last chance for any other questions, and then we'll maybe yes, sir. Can you get a mic? Please identify yourself and your affiliation.
So I'm Ciprian. I'm from JetBlue, not affiliated yet with OpenJaw, but hopefully.
We can fix that right now. Kieron will take an order. So that can be
right
fixed
next to you,
really, really quickly. I want you to know how flexible an organization we are.
Have a chair.
You asked for that one, I'm sorry.
So I have my own version of the answer to this question, but I want to get your perspective. You're talking about the Google Jigsaw, what they're putting together, and the fact that they launched Hotel Finder, and how they're trying to play in this space. So my question is, why do you think airlines will succeed in the retailing space, selling hotels and cars and other things like that, when bigger players like Google are trying to play in the exact same space?
Well, I mean, if you look at Google Flight Search, it sends people to the airline's website.
So that's, I mean, we own the airline space. We actually operate metal, but we don't own hotels.
Yeah.
Right. So we're trying to play the exact same game that Google is playing, trying to sell hotels. Right. Why do you think airlines will succeed in this?
Because you're an airline and Google isn't an airline. Google is just a facilitator of getting traffic to your site. I mean, that's what Google wants to do. Is it doesn't want to get in the transaction space. It wants to send people
my question is around the hotel. So I get the airline space, but around the hotel, why would Google send traffic for hotel to JetBlue.com as opposed to hotels.com or I don't know, Hilton .com or whatever other website.
I mean, Google's mantra, and maybe our guy from ITA will agree or disagree, is that it wants to organise the world's information. Now, it doesn't do that because it's some 1960s loving. It does it because it wants to make a lot of money from it. And Google will do whatever it can, I think, to try and, one, make more money, but also just improve what it says is the travel experience from a search perspective. What's your idea? Why do you think it's doing it?
Come on, you set it up. Now you've got to answer your own question.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that airlines are willing to go into the packaging deal more than Google is willing to go in that space, and have more flexibility.
You mentioned BA earlier.
I think it was Kieron who did this.
Yeah. What BA is doing is interesting. What Ryanair is doing, I mean, Ryanair goes through these partnerships quite a lot, but its current hotel partnership is with Hotels Combined, the Meta player. And that RyanairHotels.com, which is the microsite that it runs on, is now in the top 10 most visited destination and accommodation websites in the UK. So it's working for Ryanair. It didn't work out so well for them when they had it with Expedia. They ended up suing
But it did
each
work
other.
with them when they had the thing with GTA. So this is it seems to be a natural thing. We've got to finish now, but that's a very interesting topic. And I'd like you to come back to this, because it ends up that there is this kind of tension in the marketplace between brands. And an airline brand is a trusted brand. So would I buy a product from you if you're related to that? The answer is yes. I do trust you with that information. Might not like you, but I trust you. So I think that's something that we should bear in mind, is how does the trust thing play out? Who do I trust more? Where will I go? Good questions, and it's something of brand value that the airline should not just discard just because you don't own the actual inventory. Now today, an airline is just as much as a merchandising brand as Google or any other brand or as Expedia. So you do have the right to sell that product, and you should take advantage of it. And of course, OpenJaw has the platform for doing it. With that, everybody, I'd like to thank you all very much. We have coffee break now. Please come back here at 11:15.